Imagine the world freezing to death, but you're living like a king with an infinite food supply. After being betrayed and killed, Zhang regresses back in time to build an invincible fortress and take his revenge. Watch how he turns the apocalypse into his personal playground. The story begins with our sorrowful protagonist having his limbs severed by a brutal mob, who were cheering and shouting that they finally found something to eat. Naturally, he ended up in this miserable state because he followed the ham bully, a manipulative figure in his life, and let the man control his mind. This becomes painfully clear when we see a girl demanding an extra share of him, since she was the one who managed to trick him into opening the door. At that moment, our hero burst into tears while watching his own flesh being handed out. He swore that if he ever got another chance, he would take revenge on all of them. It wouldn't be an ordinary revenge, either. He would pay them back 100 times the pain he was feeling at that moment. However, time blurs and our hero suddenly opens his eyes to find himself in a state of sheer disbelief. He was certain that the neighbors had just broken in and killed him moments ago, so how was he able to move normally again? To figure out what was happening, he checked his phone. To his absolute shock, the date was November 12th, a full month before the global freezing catastrophe. He rushed to the balcony, and seeing the world unchanged, he realized he had been reborn. Then our protagonist, Zhang, starts recounting exactly what happened. In December 2050, a massive meteorite struck the planet, plunging the world into an ice age. Ever since that moment, the temperature in Tianhai City, where he lives, dropped to a permanent -70°C, accompanied by blizzards that lasted for a whole month and claimed countless lives. He continues by explaining how, in his past life, he relied on his connection with a convenience store owner to buy a huge amount of supplies and store them in his house. But in the end, like a fool, he allowed a group of thieves into his home. They took all his supplies and even chopped him up to eat him. Because of this, he realized he had to focus entirely on gathering a massive stockpile of resources and getting his revenge. Naturally, this stockpile had to include entertainment, food, and various weapons strong enough to blow those son-of-a-bitch thieves away. Like any protagonist in a manhua, he discovered he had a unique ability, a massive, boundless storage space where he could put whatever he liked. A brilliant idea hit him: to buy out everything in the massive hypermarket and put it inside his storage space. But before doing all that, he went to a restaurant and ordered every kind of food, having survived for years on instant noodles that no one else could even find. After finishing his meal, he received a VIP customer card from the restaurant because he spent over 50,000 yuan. Right at that moment, the treacherous girl Yu and her friend overheard that he was rich. The friend told her that the guy she used to crush on was actually wealthy and that she needed to get close to him. Yu was caught off guard, recalling how he used to pretend to be poor in the past. With no warning, she approached him and said, "What a pleasant surprise." Of course, Zhang had learned his lesson after what happened in his past life. He pulled out his credit card and said he was heading to the supermarket to buy some things, thinking to himself that he would let them help carry his stuff to his house, and in the end, he wouldn't give them anything. True to form, the toxic friends said they were also going shopping and were happy to help carry things to his house since they were neighbors. When they arrived at the store, seeing the sheer volume of his purchases, the girls were stunned, thinking he was throwing a party or going on a trip. Zheng replied with utter sarcasm, telling them he was just building up a stockpile in case a disaster hit soon. You thought he was just messing with them and told him it was better not to lie, but she insisted he treat them to lunch soon, since he had essentially become their employer. Zheng replied that he was busy during this period but would treat them next month. At that moment, her friend Kai snapped at him, telling him to stop acting like a cheapskate. However, Yu stepped in, pulled her back, and apologized to Zheng. She explained that her silly friend didn't mean it, and Kai quickly backed down, apologizing as well, given her lack of morals and principles. Meanwhile, Yu was secretly confident that Zheng wouldn't let them down. True to form, Zheng answered them, saying he would keep his word and treat them to ice and 3 blizzards, sarcastic slang for the upcoming apocalypse, a month from now. After finishing shopping and carrying the goods, he was just approaching his house while still having the toxic girls employed as his helpers. An old neighbor noticed that he was buying so much stuff and assumed the supermarket was having a big sale, so she came over and asked why they were buying so much. They told her it was all Zheng's and they were just helping him out. The old lady immediately turned to Zheng and said, "Hey kid, give me some of that," while her spoiled, ill-mannered little kid helped himself to Zheng's chocolate. This instantly triggered Zheng, who snatched his stuff back and told them he needed all of the supplies. The little brat threw a tantrum, yelling, "Give me the chocolate, you stupid piece of trash." Zheng lost his temper and snapped, warning the kid that if he opened his mouth again, he'd beat him right in front of his mother. The kid burst into tears, which annoyed the old lady, who told Zheng not to make a big deal out of it since it was just a piece of chocolate. She added that she would buy it from him and pay him back later. But our protagonist replied with pure coldness, telling her to pay up right now or go buy her own stuff, then walked away and left her standing there, fuming and shouting various elderly insults. When they finally reached his house, Yu reminded Zheng not to forget to treat them to a nice meal next time. Zheng promised he would and slammed the door right in her face because he was sick of looking at them. Once he was done with all that, he started putting all the supplies into his storage space. He wanted to double-check if the food would spoil or stay fresh inside. He then looked at his list of essential items, noting that medicine would be easy to acquire. The top priority now was getting a good heating system for the house. After that, it would be time to figure out the weapons. Getting basic tools like knives, axes, and crossbows would be easy, but the real problem was figuring out how to acquire real firepower, like pistols, assault rifles, and maybe even bazookas. Suddenly an idea struck him. He needed to sell all his assets and raise as much cash as possible, as buying weapons would become much easier later on. The next morning, he took out the products he'd bought to inspect them. To his amazement, the food remained completely fresh. While the living creatures, like the fish, had died, they hadn't rotted at all. Now completely confident that he could keep his food perfectly fresh, Zheng called the biggest and best restaurant, telling them he was hosting a massive, 3-day feast and needed meals to cover 500 tables. The restaurant replied that this would cost around 1 million yuan and required a 200,000 yuan upfront deposit to get started. Right after, our protagonist went to the bank and took out a loan using his house as collateral. Combining the loan amount with his personal savings, he now had a total of 6 million yuan. Even so, he knew this money wouldn't be enough for everything he wanted to buy. As he stood there lost in thought, a bleach blonde guy approached him and asked if he needed a loan, noting that getting bank loans could be a bit tricky with all the strict requirements. Our protagonist, his face lighting up with joy, replied that he would need about 5 million yuan and asked if his company could provide it, assuring him that he could pay it all back in just 3 months. They proceeded. The bleach blonde guy brought Zheng to his company and introduced him to the boss, Big Boss Chu. He told the boss that Zheng wanted to take out a loan. Big Boss Chu spun around in his chair in a cinematic motion, asking about the loan amount and the time frame Zheng needed to pay it back. He also warned our protagonist that their interest rates were extremely high, pointing out that to borrow 5 million, he would have to pay back 7 million, an increase of nearly 40%. To Chu's surprise, our protagonist readily agreed and even thanked him for his help. As he was signing the contract, Chu explained that Zheng needed to put up some collateral to secure the loan. Zheng chuckled to himself and offered his house, even though he had already mortgaged it to the bank. He claimed the house was worth about 5 million and that his Mercedes was worth around 300,000. Unfortunately, the manager pointed out that in their view, his house was only worth about 4.5 million, meaning they would take a loss. Well, then just lend me 4 million, you giant Chu, and I'll still pay you back 7 million, our protagonist countered. Seeing the paperwork and verifying the house was indeed under Zheng's name, Chu agreed. After Zheng left, the cunning blonde guy remarked that the kid really seemed to need the money, since he agreed to an interest rate of nearly 100%. Chu agreed, noting that they had already hit their target for the month and wouldn't need to work hard until the next one. Meanwhile, on the other side of the door, our sly protagonist muttered, "What a joke, these guys are practically handing me free money." After paying for the restaurant order, he had exactly 9 million yuan left. He headed straight to the headquarters of the Dragon Security Company, the largest home fortification firm in all of China. Zheng recalled hearing in his past life that they had built a multi-million-dollar fortified safe house for one of China's richest men, a place no one was ever able to breach. A man named Warren interrupted his thoughts, introducing himself as the business manager. Zheng quickly stepped up and said he wanted to fortify his house to the point where it could withstand even an apocalyptic catastrophe. Warren responded professionally and handed him a price list. Zheng didn't know much about this kind of hardware, so he decided not to overthink it and just let the expert handle the choices. All he needed was for his apartment to become an impenetrable fortress. Once the order was placed, Warren reassured him. He noted that even though Zheng's apartment was on the 24th floor and measured less than 120 square meters, the planned upgrades and defensive features would turn it into an absolute castle. Zheng asked if the guy actually knew anything about building castles, or if he was just blowing smoke. Warren replied that he had previously worked with mercenary armies around the globe, so he was dead certain about what he was saying. Hearing this, Zheng immediately asked if Warren knew a way to acquire actual firearms. Warren explained that these items were illegal to carry without government permission, and asked if Zheng was in danger. Zheng candidly explained that there really were some bastards who would literally eat him if they caught him, and therefore, it made no sense to spend the full 8 million yuan turning his home into a fortress, only to die a pathetic, comical death. Warren stood up, promising they would complete the fortification within half a month and that, during that time, he would look into getting Zheng the gun he was asking for. After that, Zheng went to an international shooting range to purchase a set of crossbows. When he was done, he got into his car feeling completely relaxed, as his hunting license legally allowed him to carry crossbows and hunting knives. When he returned to his apartment building, he found the restaurant staff arriving with all the food, but the building's security guard had blocked them from entering without Zhang's permission. Zhang walked over, greeted him as uncle, and told him to let the delivery staff in, confirming he was the one who ordered the food. The security guard and the rest of the neighbors were stunned, whispering and asking each other if Zhang was throwing a feast. Standing right in the middle of that crowd of onlookers was Yu. The toxic girl was convinced that he was truly wealthy, so she decided to try and make him fall in love with her, to flirt with him, and even get him to propose and marry her. Once Zhang explained the situation to the security guard, Uncle Lao, the man finally allowed the delivery vehicles to bring the food into the storage area. Meanwhile, Yu was trying to seduce Zhang, while he kept telling himself that he would never forget what she had done to him, and that he would exact the most gruesome revenge imaginable. Afterward, he went to the storage facility to look at the massive amount of food he had purchased, which was more than enough to feed 500 tables of people and then some. Within moments, he was beaming with joy as he began transferring all of it into his storage space. The best part was that all these meals were already prepared, requiring zero effort on his part when he wanted to eat later on. Things kept going this way, with Zhang bringing in more supplies every single day. On top of that, the construction crew was busy turning his apartment into an absolute fortress. This whole spectacle left the other residents completely bewildered. They gossiped about how he was doing crazy action movie stuff every day. One old man even turned to his friend, saying he felt like Zhang was preparing for the end of the world. Later on, Zhang received a message from Warren, who told him he had finally found the weapon Zhang was looking for, though it was going to be quite expensive. Zhang replied that quality was the only thing that mattered, and that he was willing to pay whatever it cost. Zhang handed the apartment keys over to the workers and told them he'd be staying at a hotel until they finished. As he walked away, people stared at him as if he were crazy, which made Zhang think to himself, they'll find out who the real madman is when they see what happens in a month. After that, Zhang went to the manager of the convenience store where he used to work and asked him to help source a large batch of medicine. The manager's brother-in-law happened to be the vice president of one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the city. Zhang offered to pay double the market price for the medication. The manager agreed to the deal and also approved the 20-day leave Zhang had previously requested. The next day, Zhang went to the warehouse to check on the supplies, remarking that it was enough to feed thousands of people. He made a mental note that he would have to completely rob and empty out this warehouse exactly 1 week before the apocalypse began, just in case anything went wrong. When he got home, he started receiving messages from Yu asking about his weird behavior lately. Zhang began to wonder if she was genuinely starting to suspect something. Right after that, she sent another message claiming she felt lonely and just wanted to chat for a bit. Since Zhang completely ignored her, she grew furious, wondering why he had changed so much toward her. Her friend Kai agreed, pointing out that Zhang had been buying massive amounts of things over the past few weeks, as if they were running out of time. Yu started to worry and asked if Kai thought Zhang had inside information about an upcoming disaster, which was why he was preparing. Kai burst into laughter, telling her that if there were any real news like that, they definitely would have heard about it. A week later, our protagonist was holding the firearm he finally received from Warren. He remarked that he was almost done with everything. All he had to do was wait for the fortification of his safe house to be completed. A little while later, our protagonist went to inspect his fortified apartment and thanked Warren for all his hard work. Warren accepted the first installment of the payment and reminded Zhang not to forget to pay the remaining balance within 3 months. As Warren walked away, Zhang chuckled to himself, knowing full well that he wouldn't be paying a single cent more since the apocalypse was about to hit anyway. While he was lost in thought, the delivery crew showed up with the water supply, snapping him back to reality. Zhang noted that everything was finally set up. The only thing remaining was clearing out the warehouse. When he went downstairs to accept the water delivery, he ran into Uncle Lao, who greeted him and curiously asked about all the water. Zhang thought to himself that Lao was a good man. He was a good guy, and having treated him very well in his past life, Zhang decided to give him a gentle warning. He mentioned that he had heard this winter would be brutally cold and that prices were about to skyrocket, advising Lao to start stockpiling food and water just like he was to avoid being taken advantage of by price gougers. Lao hesitated for a moment and asked if the information was reliable. Zhang told him that if he wasn't sure, he wouldn't be filling his own house with all these supplies. However, their conversation was interrupted by one of their neighbors who told Lao not to believe the nonsense, claiming our protagonist was just trying to trick him into buying some of the supplies he'd hoarded at a higher price. Lao tried to tell the neighbor that Zhang wasn't a liar, but the neighbor just grabbed Lao by the collar and dragged him away. Meanwhile, Zhang thought to himself that he had already done his part. The rest was up to Lao. Over the next few days, Zhang threw all his energy into gathering resources. He also kept visiting the international shooting range to sharpen his archery and shooting skills. 3 days before the catastrophe struck, Zhang put a sleeping pill in the water cooler used by his coworkers at the supermarket warehouse. He went over and told them he had brought them some warm water in case they wanted to have a drink during their break. They eagerly drank, complaining that the weather was excessively cold and that they really needed the warm water. Within half an hour, the sleeping pills took effect, and everyone was sound asleep. Once Zhang was sure that not a single person was awake, he turned off the security cameras and headed to the warehouse. Without wasting a second, he began transferring all the inventory into his storage space. As he was packing everything away, he realized that even if he wanted to store the entire country's supply in his space, there would still be plenty of room to spare. Just as he finished the job and was about to catch his breath, he noticed a massive, luxurious crate standing against the wall. He went over to inspect it and found a collection of heavy-duty coats designed with 2050 technology, capable of withstanding temperatures as low as -100 degrees Celsius, meaning no ice storm could break through them. After packing those boxes into his storage space as well, he had checked off every single item on his to-do list. To make the scene look completely realistic, Zhang went back and took a sip of the water laced with the sleeping pill himself. Even though it was basically impossible for anyone to suspect that a single person could have robbed the entire warehouse, it was better to be safe than sorry. A while later, a panicked coworker woke him up. The guy called him manager, waking Zhang from his slumber. Our protagonist opened his eyes and calmly asked, "What are you freaking out about, man?" The coworker stammered that someone had completely robbed the warehouse, leaving not even a single box behind. Zhang immediately snapped into the act he had been rehearsing for the past week, putting on a terrified face and rushed straight to the warehouse. He shouted in disbelief, asking how on earth everything could have been stolen so quickly. His act was interrupted by a phone call from the branch manager. When Zhang answered, the manager exploded, demanding an immediate explanation regarding the theft. Zhang calmly explained that they had only taken a 2-hour break, and when they returned, everything was completely gone. Naturally, the manager screamed at him over the phone, accusing him of being an inside man and stealing the supplies himself. Zhang chuckled and replied that even if he were a spy, there was no logical way he could have emptied an entire warehouse in just 2 hours. He added that the most important thing right now was to report this to upper management before they ended up taking the blame themselves. The manager started sweating and panicked, admitting that Zhang was right and saying he would report it immediately. After hanging up, Zhang turned to the other workers and explained that an investigation team would be coming to look into the situation, telling them they must. They had to cooperate with them, and soon the police arrived. After the investigation, the authorities couldn't find anything to pin on Zhang. However, the detective advised him not to leave the city for the time being, just in case they needed to ask him any follow-up questions. Zhang replied that he wasn't planning on going anywhere or even leaving his house for the next couple of days. Checking his phone, Zhang noticed that there were exactly 2 days left until the global freezing catastrophe. He began to see that the world outside was suddenly snowing, a clear sign that the event was truly near. He quickened his pace on his way home, muttering that the world would completely change in less than 48 hours. 2 days later, at exactly 2:00 a.m., the disaster began. News broke that a meteorite had collided with the Earth, and the aftermath caused the temperature to drop down to -100 degrees. Naturally, the only person who wasn't worried and was actually thrilled was the fearless Zhang. He sat comfortably, drinking a hot cup of coffee as he watched the news and social media comments. Since it was just the beginning and the temperature had only dropped to -10 degrees so far, people were actually happy because they thought they would get some time off work. But Zhang knew the harsh reality, noting that this was merely the start. The temperature would continue to drop gradually over the next 3 months, and everyone would see hell with their own eyes. Meanwhile, he could see you, her friend, and everyone else celebrating the snow and taking selfies using the #IceSelfie hashtag. That illusion was shattered the very next morning. A woman tried to open the building's front door but ran into massive difficulties. Even after managing to push it open, she was met with a massive wall of snow piled up right in front of her home. At the same time, our protagonist woke up to his ringing phone. Annoyed because it was still very early, he looked at the screen to see it was none other than you, who looked like she was ready to bother him again. He answered, asking, "What do you want so early in the morning, woman?" She told him it was freezing outside and asked if he had known about it in advance, and if that was the reason he bought all those supplies. Our cool protagonist replied with pure indifference, saying that a friend had mentioned it to him, though even he hadn't expected the weather to get this cold. You started calling him Zhang, my dear, asking why he hadn't told her so she could prepare like he did. But the new Zhang wasn't a simp anymore. Even her sweet, pleading tone had zero effect on her target. He told her to stop bothering him and hung up in her face. Naturally, this crushed her non-existent pride. She realized she had to find another way to get close to him. Looking at our protagonist, he was furious at the annoying girl, thinking he never could have imagined she would have the nerve to blame him for not telling her. Deciding to calm his nerves, he took a hot shower and sat down to have breakfast. While eating, he watched the news. The terrified anchor was reporting that the meteorological agency was advising everyone to stay indoors until they figured out the cause of the unexplainable freeze. His peaceful moment was interrupted by a message from the shameless Yu, who asked if he could share some food since it was too cold to go outside. Zheng knew the real reason behind her request. Prices had skyrocketed as people desperately tried to buy and store whatever provisions they could find, making food demand extremely high. Deciding to mess with her, Zheng sent her a photo of the food and alcohol sitting right in front of him to show off how well he was living. The sight made her mouth water, as those items alone cost about 3,000 yuan. It made her try to flirt with him, saying she had wanted to try that same food and drink too. But our bold protagonist replied with cold indifference, telling her that if she wanted anything, she could go buy it at the supermarket herself, and even though his words. Although the words made her want to explode with rage, she kept her temper in check because she knew she would be the one to lose out if Zheng cut her off. Meanwhile, our protagonist set his phone aside before his mood could be ruined, then glanced at the building's entrance camera to see what was going on. He saw that the old busybody Lin was standing there trying to stop the residents from leaving the building. She was telling them there was no need to hoard supplies, claiming the snow would only last a couple of days at most. The residents were furious, shouting back that if they hesitated now, prices would go even higher later, and they wouldn't be able to afford anything at all. Lin stood her ground, warning them that buying large quantities of provisions was exactly what would make prices skyrocket. She threatened to report them to the authorities if they caused a severe shortage of resources. Just as they were about to back down under her threats, they were surprised to hear Zheng's voice addressing Lin. He told her to step aside and let people leave as they pleased, pointing out that this blizzard might last much longer, and before long, no one would be able to go outside at all. His remark agitated the crowd even more. They started shouting, asking who would take responsibility if the blizzards actually persisted. Lin answered them by stating that the neighborhood committee, which she headed, would take full responsibility. Meanwhile, she was thinking to herself that if she ever got her hands on Zheng, she would tear him in half for trying to prove her wrong in front of everyone. Turning to him, she snapped that his incitement was a crime and that she could report him. Zheng casually dismissed her, telling her not to give him a headache with her nonsense, and walked away. Before leaving, he made it clear to everyone that from now on, he wouldn't leave his apartment for any reason. A week passed in the blink of an eye. Just as expected, the blizzards were getting worse every day rather than letting up. While Zheng was relaxing inside, playing video games and thinking that this was the life, forgetting about people and relationships, he was surprised to receive a message. He checked the neighborhood group chat and saw that old lady Lin was demanding that he go out and clear the snow blocking the first floor. Our protagonist knew she was trying to get back at him, but he didn't expect her to act this quickly. He replied, stating that it was freezing outside and that he wasn't stepping a foot out of his apartment until the blizzard was over. The residents started to side with him, pointing out that the temperature was dangerously low and that it was unreasonable to ask him to go out in such conditions. Irritated, Lin wrote back that they should be supporting her because she was trying to help them clear the snow. She insisted that young, healthy men like Zheng were the best fit for the job due to their physical strength. Speaking in her capacity as the head of the neighborhood committee, she ordered Zheng to do it, warning that if he refused, she would punish him once the storm passed. Zheng, being as bold as ever and fearing no one, decided to put her in her place in front of the whole chat. He picked up his phone and wrote that the neighborhood committee was supposed to handle such tasks, not the ordinary residents, and that they wouldn't let her bully them. He added that there were young men his age or even stronger living in the building. However, he pointed out that she was too cowardly to ask them for help because they came from wealthy, influential families. His words rallied the rest of the neighborhood. They agreed that Zheng was absolutely right and pointed out that she never asked anything of the wealthy residents, such as Chen or Xiao Hao. Chen was the boss of a construction company with over 100 roughnecks working under him, and he lived on the 6th floor. Meanwhile, Xiao Hao on the right lived on a higher floor and was the son of a billionaire with powerful connections to top-tier people in the city. Xiao Hao lived on the 8th floor, so Zheng tried to corner her by pointing this out, suggesting she ask them to clear the snow too. Zheng thought to himself that he was doing this because Chen was the first person who tried to break into his apartment with an axe in his past life, and Xiao Hao was the first to start carving him up while he was still alive. On top of that, he had seen most of his neighbors taking parts of his body, save for a very small few. After our hero's bold remarks, the residents all began to side with him, agreeing that she was clearly terrified of the wealthy residents and only targeted them because they were just ordinary folks. This reaction truly infuriated her and put her in a tight spot, but to avoid losing the little trust people had left in her, she had no choice but to send messages to Chen and Xiao Hao, asking them to help clear the snow. At that exact moment, Chen the thug was still awake, checking his phone. He noticed that Lin had tagged both him and Xiao Hao in the group chat, asking for help with the snow removal. Enraged, he snapped and sent an aggressive voice note, screaming at her and threatening to end her if she ever asked him to do something like that again. Just as the old lady was recovering from that shock, another message arrived from Xiao Hao. The guy told her that he was extremely wealthy and had absolutely no intention of leaving his apartment, as he had everything he could possibly need right inside. He added that if anyone wanted to go out, they could go and shovel the snow themselves, and even attached a picture with his girlfriend lounging around. He captioned it in the neighborhood group chat, saying that while they were relaxing, it was only the poor people who had to work and run outside to shovel snow before getting fired. This response absolutely burned Lin up, making her even more furious. Meanwhile, Zheng didn't care at all. He was busy preparing his next meal since he had just finished his previous one. Having nothing better to do than mess with his life, Lin sent Zheng a private message, warning him that if he didn't go down immediately to shovel the snow, no one would be able to get to work because of him. Zheng fired back, putting her firmly in her place. He told her he knew exactly what had happened. She was taking her frustration out on him because the others had yelled at her, mistaking him for an easy target. Showing a completely different cold side of himself, he warned her that if she kept bothering him and barking like a stray dog, he wouldn't hesitate to take her out just to get some peace. Lin felt utterly defeated on the spot, sitting down and vowing to make him pay dearly very soon. A few moments later, our protagonist heard a loud, violent pounding on his door, with a man shouting for him to come out. It was Chen, who had noticed that Zheng was the very first person to bring up his name in the building's chat group. He was yelling that he had come over today specifically to kill him, and that if Zheng didn't open the door, he would smash it over his head. Our protagonist stood up, grabbed his crossbow, and got ready to strike. Although he initially thought about taking him out on the spot, he changed his mind, deciding he wanted to humiliate the guy a bit first to get revenge for what happened in his past life. He aimed at Chen's leg, deciding it would be a suitable first target. For those wondering how our protagonist was aiming from inside the apartment, it was through the small squares on the peephole security flap on the reinforced door, which could only be opened and closed from inside the house. Zheng didn't waste a second and shot an arrow right into Chen's leg. Chen collapsed to the ground, screaming in agony. Looking down at him, Zheng thought to himself that in the sub-zero temperatures, that kind of injury could cost Chen his leg if it wasn't treated immediately, not to mention the risk of infection. Chen, realizing the same thing, knew he had to find help quickly, or his leg would be dead in less than half an hour. But in this kind of weather, when he tried calling emergency services, the line was dead. Driven by desperation, Chen decided to perform the surgery and stitch up the wound himself. He started by snapping the shaft of the arrow. Chen managed to pull the arrow out of his leg, noting that his leg was numb from the cold, which meant he wouldn't even need anesthesia. Once he was done, he grabbed his phone and started typing in the neighborhood group chat, vowing that he would kill Zheng even if it was the last thing he ever did. But our ruthless protagonist replied coldly, telling him that if he ever came near his apartment again, he'd make sure to take out his other leg too. The neighbors who saw what Zheng had done were completely stunned. At the same time, Chen started calling all his thugs, ordering them to come over immediately and help him kill Zheng. Since the snow blocking the building's entrance only stopped vehicles but not pedestrians, his goons all managed to make it to Chen's apartment. "What are your orders, boss?" they asked. Chen explained what had happened, how Zheng had almost cost him his leg, and pointed out that the guy lived on the 24th floor. He warned them to watch out for the crossbow, instructing them simply to bash down the door and take Zheng out. The thugs didn't waste any time and headed up to Zheng's place, ordering him to open the door unless he wanted them to force their way in. A bald thug started smashing the door with a cleaver, shouting angrily that they had been forced to walk all the way there through the blizzard and wouldn't leave until they chopped Zheng in half. But because the door was heavily reinforced, the cleaver simply snapped in half and the blade flew, grazing the head of one of the thugs. As the bald guy realized that the door was made of solid metal and that they needed a new plan to break in, our protagonist was watching them, completely annoyed. He hadn't expected them to come back this quickly. Deciding to mess with them, Zheng taunted the group, asking if they were hungry or something, since that might help them figure out how to break down the door. The bald guy snapped back, telling Zheng to stop hiding like a little kid and come out if he had the guts. Hearing this, Zheng decided to pause his video game and play with them instead. He hooked a hose up to the faucet and called out, "Give me a second, I'll be right out." When he poked the hose through one of the small openings in the reinforced door, the brown-haired thug was holding a metal tray, thinking Zheng wouldn't be able to shoot arrows at them anymore. But to his shock, Zheng unleashed a freezing blast of water. He started spraying them in a spiderweb-like pattern, clearly having a lot of fun. By the time he was done, most of the thieves were either passed out or crying for their moms from the freezing cold. When the thugs returned to Chen's apartment, shivering in their soaked clothes, Chen was bewildered and asked where the hell Zheng was. Seeing that they were too cold to even speak, he threw some blankets over them and demanded an explanation. The bald guy stammered out that Zheng's door was incredibly tough. They had tried to break it for half an hour without leaving a single dent. On top of that, Zheng had blasted them with freezing water until some of them literally pissed themselves from the cold. Hearing this, Chen realized just how tough Zheng was, recalling the pressure he had felt when he tried to bully the guy earlier. He came up with a new plan, ordering his men to keep an eye on Zheng's apartment around the clock. He figured Zheng would eventually have to step outside, and when he did, they would turn him into roasted sweet potatoes. Meanwhile, Uncle Lao and a few other residents were trying to shovel a path through the snow to reach the supermarket. But after a while, they lost hope and decided to head back to their homes, as the snow was falling much faster than they could possibly clear it. Back inside, Zheng was watching the news. The anchor was reporting that global governments were making a final joint effort to counter the freezing catastrophe, which had already claimed tens of millions of lives. Zheng chuckled, knowing that this was only the beginning. He remembered that in his past life, over 90% of all living creatures died. Checking his phone again, he saw that old lady Lin was frantically sending messages in the group chat, trying to reassure the residents that the government would save them. She kept insisting the government would handle it, but moments later, Zheng got a private DM from Yu. She acted like she was just checking in on him. Zheng knew better. He knew she wasn't hitting him up out of the kindness of her heart. Sure enough, Yu revealed her true colors, whining that she had run out of food and wanted to borrow some, promising to treat him to lunch once the blizzard stopped. Zheng didn't miss a beat. He did what he does best. He snapped a photo of his gourmet meal and sent it to her, casually mentioning that he couldn't do lunch because he was already stuffed. Yu lost it. She fumed, telling herself she'd had enough of his attitude and wouldn't speak to him again. Immediately after, Kai jumped in, messaging Zheng from her own phone. She told him his words really hurt Yu's feelings and that Yu was planning to ghost him for good. Zheng, cold as ice, replied, "What is this, a good cop, bad cop routine?" Kai tried to play it off, claiming she only had his best interests at heart. She told him that if he just shared a couple of meals, he'd finally win the heart of the girl he'd been crushing on forever. Zheng decided to troll her even harder. He replied with something completely nonsensical. "Sorry, I left my pants on the stove." When Kai saw that level of blatant disrespect, she was ready to blow a fuse. She ran to her partner in crime, Yu, telling her that Zheng was ignoring her too. Yu snapped back, saying she didn't even know who Zheng was anymore and never wanted to hear his name again. Desperate, Yu asked Kai if she knew any other simps they could exploit. Within seconds, Yu was on the phone with a guy named Bing, ordering him to bring food to her place immediately. Less than an hour later, this ultimate simp showed up at her door, panting because he'd run through the snow just to make sure she didn't get mad. He proudly presented the last of his food, which he'd snagged on sale. Yu's face did a complete 180. She gave him a fake smile and said, "Thanks, Bing Kun." But before the poor guy could even get a word out, Kai slammed the door in his face so he wouldn't hang around and annoy them. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. Zheng was living his best life, eating well without gaining a pound, noting that the game was about to enter level 2. Right on cue, the power cut out across the entire building. Panic hit the residents instantly. People poured into the hallways, frantically asking if anyone had a generator. One woman cried out that the real disaster was the lack of hot water. She couldn't even make formula for her baby. Another guy complained that the cold was becoming unbearable now that the heaters were dead. The fear was real. They started shouting, "Where's the government?" and "We're all gonna freeze," as the temperature inside dropped to -30. The only person not sweating it was Zheng. He had planned for every single detail. He fired up one of his high-end generators, muttering, "Nothing beats a warm house." In the pitch-black building, his apartment was the only one glowing with light. Meanwhile, that old hag Lin and her spoiled grandson were in shock. She couldn't believe it, especially after the government's reassuring messages the day before. At the same time, the neighborhood group chat was blowing up. Committee members were debating whether they had actually entered a new ice age like the one millions of years ago. They started suggesting that everyone needed to scavenge for resources immediately. Finally, the reality started to sink in for Lin. This wasn't going away anytime soon. Under pressure from her grandson, who kept asking where his parents were and when he could eat, she decided to hatch a desperate, reckless plan to protect her precious brat. She sent a message to the entire neighborhood group chat, telling them not to panic and that the crisis was only temporary. She claimed that the authorities had already informed her that crews were working on restoring the water and power. Furthermore, she announced an official decree stating that all resources in the building now belonged to the head of the committee, her. Therefore, all residents had to hand over their supplies immediately so she could properly organize, divide, and distribute them fairly among everyone. She ended her message by warning that anyone who refused would be violating state law and arrested on the spot. Everyone who read the message, including Xiao Hao, was caught off guard, unable to argue against what seemed like a state order. Even Chen and his thugs remained completely silent because no matter how much of a gangster he was, he certainly wasn't going to go to war with the police. As his thugs whined that they had caught a cold and desperately needed medicine, our protagonist was just chilling, enjoying his comfortable life and playing video games. His relaxed moment was suddenly interrupted by a private message from old lady Lin, in which she stated that she would begin collecting supplies from every home in the building to redistribute them evenly. Zheng let out a bitter laugh, realizing this was the exact same move that old hag had pulled in his previous life. What annoyed him most was that back then, he had handed over a massive portion of his resources generously. But in the end, she betrayed him and told the neighbors that he was hoarding food, making his apartment their primary target. Lin sent him a direct message, pointing out that she knew he worked at the warehouse, meaning he must have stored food somewhere. She added that she had also seen the numerous delivery trucks bringing groceries to his place a while ago. Zheng replied with absolute coldness, telling her that all his supplies were gone, and that he was actually looking forward to getting a share of the supplies she was about to collect. When Lin read his reply, she was furious, thinking he was playing dumb and that it was impossible for him to have gone through all those groceries that quickly. However, she forced herself to calm down and decided to try and play nice with him, as she desperately needed those resources for her and her spoiled grandson. She sent another message, stating that everyone knew he was a manager at a mega warehouse, which surely allowed him to get provisions at a heavy discount. She added that if he helped out now, the neighborhood committee and the residents wouldn't forget his kindness. Zheng simply replied that he wasn't lying and that he had eaten absolutely everything. Then, he cheekily asked her to spare him a few packs of instant noodles because he was still hungry. Lin completely lost her temper, shouting at him through the screen. She threatened that if he didn't hand over every last supply he had, he would be disobeying the committee and the authorities, and would be arrested as soon as the blizzard passed. Zheng responded with his usual cold, mocking tone, telling her to stop playing cop when she wasn't even a government employee. He added that she could fool herself and pretend she still had any real authority, but he wasn't going to play her game, and she could go bang her head against the wall for all he cared. Furious, Lin threw her phone against the wall. She decided to forget about Zheng for the moment and focus on the rest of the residents. Shortly after, our protagonist watched as the other residents handed over their supplies. He noted to himself that the amount collected from each household was barely enough to feed a small family for 3 days. He was baffled by their sheer stupidity, but he decided to let them burn through their own resources and deal with the consequences. A few days later, a resident sent a message in the chat stating that her family had run out of food and demanded that Lin begin the redistribution. As usual, the rest of the residents backed her up in the chat. But behind closed doors, Lin was sitting in her room, using her indestructible Nokia phone, eating the private stockpile with her grandson. She chuckled to herself, thinking how naive they were for trusting her, but her twisted little daydream was interrupted when her phone rang. She assumed they had finally realized they'd been scammed. To her absolute horror and dread, the caller ID showed Chen himself. When she answered, Chen wasted no time, telling her he didn't know she was a thief just like him. She tried to squirm out of the conversation, claiming she only gathered the supplies so she could redistribute them equally. Chen snapped back that if that was the case, he was there to collect his share. Trying to act clever, she told him she was waiting for everyone else to hand in their shares before she started distributing anything. Chen dropped the polite act entirely and showed his true, intimidating colors. In plain terms, he told her he wanted every single supply she had collected. He warned her that if she didn't hand them over willingly, he and his men would take them by force. Chen didn't waste a second and headed straight to her apartment with his thugs. Lin started screaming, threatening to call the police, knowing full well the line was dead and no one was coming. Chen shut her up by slapping her across the face, telling her he was there to get revenge for the people she had tricked and robbed. Meanwhile, Zheng was sitting comfortably with a bowl of popcorn, thoroughly enjoying the show. He got a brilliant idea. He recorded the whole scene on his phone and sent the video straight to the neighborhood group chat. Back in Lin's apartment, Chen threw the old woman to the floor and ordered his men to gather all the resources belonging to the poor residents. At that moment, Lin grabbed onto his leg, begging him not to take everything, especially since her own private stash was mixed in with the pile. She pleaded that if he took it, she and her grandson would starve. Chen told her that wasn't his problem and that she should have thought twice before scamming people. But when he found her still clinging to his leg, he got annoyed and kicked her away. Seeing his grandmother get struck right in front of him triggered whatever tiny bit of courage the spoiled brat had in him. He grabbed a knife, screaming at the thugs to get out immediately, and unexpectedly lunged forward, stabbing one of the thugs right in the stomach. The thug looked down, stunned, and said, "You really just stabbed me in the gut at my age, you little punk." That was the last word the kid ever heard. The thug retaliated by kicking the boy across the room, mimicking a Cristiano Ronaldo overhead kick. The kid flew and crashed onto the sofa. The other thugs couldn't help but joke, telling their buddy they didn't know he was such a skilled soccer player. Within seconds, Lin rushed over to check on her precious grandson. By the time the thugs finished collecting all the supplies, Chen looked down at her and told her she got exactly what she deserved after trying to swindle her own neighbors. The residents, having watched the entire ordeal thanks to the video Zheng sent to the chat, were all laughing and saying she got what was coming to her. But Zheng was laughing for a completely different reason. He thought to himself that they were all a bunch of fools. After all, if Chen could break into Lin's apartment this easily, what was stopping him from doing the exact same thing to their homes next and stealing everything they owned? Shaking his head, he decided it was none of his business, especially since no one could ever break into his apartment. However, his thoughts were interrupted by a message from Lin in the group chat, pleading for medicine because her grandson was dying, and mentioning that the neighborhood doctor, Ju, needed supplies to operate on him. Zhang was taken aback, recalling the doctor from his past life. He remembered her as a genuinely good person who had saved countless lives. A moment later, Ju confirmed that she had given the boy first aid, but needed specific medications to complete the surgery. Lin began begging everyone in the group chat, offering to get down on her knees and apologize if they would just help. The residents simply mocked her, asking exactly how she planned to get down on her knees through a text message, knowing no one would help. They used the laughing emoji in the group chat, telling her that no one should help her after what she had pulled, and that they weren't doctors like Ju to forgive and help her out. When Zhang saw this, he agreed with their point. He knew that even if they managed to save the brat's life right now, he was bound to die eventually from the freezing conditions anyway. Time passed, and the residents finally started to notice that the snow had completely buried the first floor, which sent them into an even deeper panic. To make things worse, the news announced that they had officially entered an ice age, an event that hadn't occurred for millions of years. A week passed by in a flash. Word on the news was that temperatures in cities across the northern region had dropped to -100°C. Other cities were completely buried under the snow, and anyone who failed to escape on time died on the road. Back in the neighborhood group chat, Lin was spamming messages for the 1000th time, demanding that everyone hand over their supplies or else she would report them to the police once the blizzard ended. But when she finally realized it wasn't working, she resorted to begging them to save her grandson, even offering to buy food at a premium price. One of the residents replied, saying she had plenty of instant noodles and was willing to sell a single pack for 1,000 yuan. It turned into a bidding war. Another resident stepped in and offered 2,000 yuan for a pack. Seeing those crazy prices, some residents were mesmerized, convincing themselves that this blizzard couldn't possibly last that long. It was revealed that the guy offering 2,000 yuan was the wealthy Xiao Hao. He sent a message to the group offering to buy up any and all resources people wanted to sell at the highest possible price. He thought to himself that the blizzards were going to last a long time, and cash would be entirely worthless soon. He needed to take advantage of the poor residents and strip them of all their resources before they figured out the truth. However, a frustrated resident replied to Xiao Hao, complaining that she hadn't eaten in days and that his bidding war was just making it impossible for ordinary folks to buy anything. He replied with cold indifference, pointing out that he hadn't taken anything from her and that he was simply offering top dollar because his mother had plenty of money. The woman was named Kai and she had a young daughter. Kai began to plead with people in the group, begging for help because she couldn't find food for her or her 9-month-old baby. Zheng smiled to himself, knowing that anyone who actually helped her would be an idiot. He remembered from his past life that Kai had managed to survive for a long time, meaning she was far from helpless. 10 days flew by in the blink of an eye. While Zheng was in the middle of a workout, his phone rang. He looked at the caller ID and saw that the toxic duo was calling. He figured they must have run out of their supplies and were about to starve. He answered with his usual cold demeanor, asking why they were video calling, and sarcastically asking if they were just doing it to show off how much weight they had lost. When they saw the food and the warm heater glowing in the background, Kai was dumbfounded, asking how Zheng still had food left. Yu was just as baffled, wondering how Zheng could be sweating in the middle of all this snow. Zheng told them that the food behind him was just leftovers because he was too lazy to cook. He added that he was sitting right next to the heater, so it was actually uncomfortably hot in his place. Hearing this, Yu immediately put on her best acting voice, asking if he could let her into his apartment, even just to look. She kept flirting with him, saying, "I missed you, Zheng-kun." But Zheng had learned his lesson. He told her to stay inside and not go out in the cold. He thought to himself that her personality was disgusting and wondered how on earth his simp self had ever been blinded to the point of liking her. They used the laughing emoji in the group chat, telling her that no one should help her after what she had pulled, and that they weren't doctors like Ju to forgive and help her out. When Zheng saw this, he agreed with their point. He knew that even if they managed to save the brat's life right now, he was bound to die eventually from the freezing conditions anyway. Time passed and the residents finally started to notice that the snow had completely buried the first floor, which sent them into an even deeper panic. To make things worse, the news announced that they had officially entered an ice age, an event that hadn't occurred for millions of years. A week passed by in a flash. Word on the news was that temperatures in cities across the northern region had dropped to -100°C. Other cities were completely buried under the snow, and anyone who failed to escape on time died on the road. At the same time, Lin was still deeply worried about her grandson, whose condition was only getting worse. Elsewhere, we see Dr. Ju treating Chen's leg, with Chen promising to give her resources in return. Then there was Xiao Hao, who was busy buying up resources from the residents at inflated prices. But leaving them all aside, we have to check back in on the toxic duo. Kai was still reprimanding Yu, asking who they were going to rely on now that they had driven Zheng away. Yu replied that all they had to do was kill Zheng and take everything he owned. She pulled out her phone and called Bing, telling her friend that they would need some muscle to help take him down. When the simp Bing arrived, he found Yu crying, claiming she had just spoken to Zhang, and he refused to give her any supplies unless she let him humiliate her. Bing snapped with rage, declaring that he would tear Zhang in half when he saw him, and wouldn't let him get away with what he'd done. Yu seized the moment, adding that she wanted to take over Zhang's apartment and live there together with Bing. Hearing that, the simp's blood boiled, and he agreed, telling her they needed to prepare properly and bring weapons before heading over. They gathered baseball bats and knives and marched over to Zhang's apartment. Bing began pounding on the door, telling the two toxic girls to stand back. When Zhang glanced at the camera, which no one knew the location of, he only saw Bing, who was actually his co-worker from the warehouse. But the two girls were impatient and moving around, unable to stand still in the cold. When Zhang saw them, he nearly exploded with rage upon seeing his own co-worker joining them. He thought to himself that if they wanted to kill him, they should have brought a lot more people. He went over to prepare his trusty hose. Bing spoke up, saying that he had run out of all his food and came to ask Zhang for some provisions, especially since they used to be co-workers. Zhang replied that he should just wait a second and that he was coming right out to give him all the food he could possibly want, saying this while staring directly at his trash can. Zhang didn't waste any time and grabbing. Zhang grabbed the hose, went to the reinforced door, and poked it through the small opening as usual. While the thieves were waiting eagerly for the door to open, weapons in hand, they were shocked to see Zhang unleash a blast of leftover food and pickled eggplants. Repulsed and screaming in disgust, they yelled, "What the hell is this stuff?" Zhang replied calmly, telling them these were simply his kitchen leftovers and that they should be thanking him instead of getting upset. Hearing this, Bing's blood boiled. He yelled that he would kill Zhang today and tried to break through the door by stabbing it with his knife. But the moment the knife made contact, the blade snapped in half, and the sheer recoil injured Bing's own hand. While Bing writhed on the floor in agony, Zhang just laughed at him. He then returned to his favorite chair, declaring that he would never step outside his apartment, and yet he would outlive all of them during this ice age. The next morning, Zhang woke up with a start to the sound of gunfire. Feeling anxious, he grabbed his laptop to check the surveillance cameras and figure out who in the building had guns. Just as he expected, he spotted Chen. He was surprised to see that Chen was not only still alive, but that he and his gang were carrying boxes of supplies out of various apartments. After noticing where they were getting their water, he finally understood how they were surviving. Once the city's tap water shut down, some residents had gathered snow from outside and boiled it to drink. Chen and his thugs had taken this opportunity to raid their apartments, looting all their resources and even taking lives along the way. Zhang knew that once those residents returned, they wouldn't stand a chance and would simply freeze or starve to death. At this moment, Zhang was specifically referring to the residents of the third floor, which was the exact floor Chen and his crew were currently looting. After securing the supplies from the lower floors, Chen sent a message to the main neighborhood group chat to terrify everyone. He stated that from this point forward until the end of the blizzards, he was the boss of this building, and anyone who disobeyed his orders would end up like the people in the photos he attached. When Zhang saw this, he was actually impressed by Chen's cunning. He knew for a fact that Chen didn't possess enough ammunition or thugs to actually subjugate the entire building, so he was using intimidation tactics to prevent a rebellion. His train of thought was interrupted when he noticed he had been added to a secret chat group with other residents of the building. In this group, people were discussing Chen's brutality and the crimes he'd committed against the residents so far. One resident proposed that everyone should unite to stand up against Chen and his thugs, pointing out that even if Chen had a gun, if they all swarmed him from every angle, there was nothing he could do. Many people agreed and asked the courageous guy who came up with the idea when they should start. But when the time came, the instigator and a few other cowards started making excuses, claiming they needed to plan it out properly first. Zhang burst out laughing, noting that the guy who proposed the plan backed down the moment things got serious. But amidst the widespread fear and hesitation, Uncle Lao spoke up. He warned them that if they stayed silent, they would all die. Even if Chen didn't shoot them and just took their supplies, they would still die of starvation and thirst anyway. Lao added that he was willing to lead the attack, but he needed everyone to join him. Suddenly, one of the cowards spoke up, saying he supported and encouraged the idea and offered to donate his kitchen knives. All the other replies were just as useless, with no one actually willing to step up. Lao told them that their moral support wouldn't do anything, and that he needed at least a dozen young men to join him in order to ensure victory over Chen. One woman replied, saying they couldn't trust anyone after what had happened. They brought up Lin, explaining that everyone was terrified to send their young men with him because he might turn out to be a traitor, just like the old woman, and hand them over to Chen. Naturally, if that happened, the only people with any fighting capability would be wiped out, leaving nothing but women, children, and the elderly. When the residents saw how logical this argument was, a fresh, heated argument broke out in the chat, splitting them into two opposing factions, supporters and opponents. Looking back at our protagonist, Zhang, we find him remarking that the very people who tried to incite a rebellion and then back down when things got serious, deserved what was coming to them. Meanwhile, Chen ordered his thugs to gather the bodies of the dead so they could eat them later. One of his thugs tried to object, urging him to abandon the idea of cannibalism and pointing out that there were certainly still people in the building with hidden supplies. But Chen lost his temper and snapped, warning the guy that if he kept running his mouth, he'd be the next meal on the menu. The guy quickly backed down and continued the job, agreeing that everything Boss Chen said was correct. But Chen knew full well that none of his men would have listened to him or eaten human flesh if he hadn't had the gun. Even so, he was confident that once they ate the meat, they would have no choice but to follow him and never object again. Back in his apartment, Zhang was watching the whole thing unfold on his laptop. He knew exactly what Chen was up to, killing the residents and hoarding their bodies to eat later. Because of this, Zhang made up his mind that the moment Chen even tried to get near his apartment, he would take him down. The very next morning, Yu, the loudmouth who led the opposition, started screaming in the group chat, saying that Chen's men were trying to break into her apartment and begging Uncle Lao to come to her rescue since he used to be in the military. This was despite the fact that she had been one of the first people to oppose the idea of rebelling against Chen in the first place. But moments later, her door gave out and one of the thugs successfully broke in. She began screaming, begging him to leave her alone and offering to hand over every single resource in her home. Instead, he dragged her across the floor, telling her he was going to take the supplies and her as well. Meanwhile, the supporters faction mocked her in the chat, writing that she got what she deserved, and that at least her death would buy the rest of them a little time. Over on the other side, we see the two toxic girls trembling in fear, assuming Chen was targeting the girls specifically to humiliate them, completely unaware that he planned to eat them. Terrified, they realized they had to act fast since they were girls too, and their turn would come soon. This led Yu to come up with a desperate plan. She decided to leak the rumor that Zhang had a massive amount of supplies, hoping to convince the residents to break into his place and use it as a sanctuary. Within seconds, Zhang found himself added to a secret group chat called The Alliance. Before he even understood what was going on, he received a message from Yu, claiming that they had formed a team and needed a place to stay. She wrote that his apartment was the perfect spot because it was heavily fortified, had a large balcony that collected a massive amount of snow, ensuring a steady supply of drinking water. When Zhang saw her message, he couldn't help but laugh out loud, realizing it was the exact same trick she'd pulled in his previous life when he was still an idiot. He replied, making it clear that he preferred living alone and having his own space. The members of the Alliance started to pressure him, claiming that if they united, Chen wouldn't be able to hurt them. Yu even told him that they were neighbors and old friends, and that if he refused to help, he would be indirectly sacrificing the lives of 8 people. Zheng responded with absolute coldness, telling them that in this ice age, everyone was responsible for their own survival, and he wouldn't do a single thing without getting paid first. Right after that, he left the group chat, leaving them talking to themselves. Naturally, Yu put on a fake shocked act, claiming that he had abandoned them even though they were old friends from way back. Hearing this, the guy with the glasses agreed, saying that someone as greedy as Zheng didn't deserve to be treated with respect, and that they had no choice but to break into his house by force. The man in yellow backed up the others, insisting that people like Zhang didn't deserve to live in a secured home like this. He added that he used to work at a shut-down manufacturing company, so he knew exactly how to pick any lock. At that moment, Yu jumped into the conversation and said that once they opened the lock for him, they would all storm inside and beat him up badly. They didn't waste any time and headed straight there. The man in yellow started working on the lock while the others stood behind holding umbrellas. Yu suggested they could just spray him with water to stop him from doing anything. Meanwhile, Zhang was inside watching everything through the window, laughing. He said his door had 5 layers of defense, making it as hard to breach as a bank vault. Still, he decided to play along and activated the high-voltage electric defense system. Immediately, the man in yellow was shocked violently and forced to step back from the door. Within seconds, he collapsed to the ground, stunned and barely conscious. The man with glasses snapped in anger, yelling at Zhang to come out if he was brave enough. The girl with them insisted they had only come to talk peacefully, but after Zhang killed their yellow-clothed companion, he needed to come out and explain himself. Zhang just laughed. He said he was only doing to them what they had planned to do to him. He knew that if they had managed to break in, they would have killed or kicked him out. Then he picked up his bow and said he would punish them for trying to invade his home. Without hesitation, he fired an arrow through a narrow opening, hitting the man with glasses in the shoulder. Shocked, the group panicked and tried to flee. Zhang didn't stop. He fired again, hitting the man in yellow in the arm and another person in the back within seconds. The remaining 2, one man on the left and a girl named Wang, ran away as fast as they could. When they finally got back, Wang checked the others' injuries and realized Zhang had used real, lethal arrows. The man with glasses admitted he never expected Zhang to actually try to kill them. The man in yellow added that without quick antibiotics, and with the current conditions, they might die. Amid the panic, one of the girls blamed herself, saying it was her fault. When she first asked for help breaking into Zhang's house, she only mentioned that the door had a certain number of locks without explaining anything else. Wang felt she already knew more than she had said, which is why she and her friend stayed back. Yu quickly defended herself, saying that the last 2 times they went there, Zhang only had a simple water hose. The injured man struggled to his feet and reassured Wang that Yu would never intentionally deceive them. The man with glasses also said this was not the time for arguments. They needed to treat the injuries first. Wang, still frustrated, told the others to stay with the injured while she figured out a solution. She then called Dr. Zhou for help. After a while, Dr. Zhou arrived and examined the injured man. She was surprised and asked if people were really using arrows these days. Wang explained the situation and asked if she had seen similar injuries before. Dr. Zhou said she was referring to a patient she had treated at the hospital. She then explained that the wounds were deep and the chances of a successful surgery without proper medical equipment were very low. The only possible solution would be to remove the arrows from their bodies, but doing that safely would require antibiotics and proper medical support. They would also need other medicines, otherwise the infection would spread through their bodies and they would die. Wang panicked and said Zhang was a monster, insisting that even if they had managed to take over his house, they never intended to kill him. When Zhou heard the name Zhang, she looked confused. She said she had only seen that person in the building once or twice, to the point she thought he was just visiting someone briefly and leaving. Pulling herself back to reality, she told them clearly that without proper medication, she couldn't help them. At that moment, Yu stepped in and said she was sure Zhang had a lot of medicine. She claimed she had seen him receiving a large medical shipment right before the disaster. Then she started thinking out loud, connecting all his strange behavior before everything happened. She concluded that he probably knew the disaster was coming and prepared for it, including stocking up on medicine. Zhou replied that antibiotics are essential drugs. If he really knew about the disaster and stocked up, then he would definitely have large quantities. The man with glasses, still barely thinking clearly, said they should send someone to Zhang and force him to take responsibility for treating them, since he was the one who injured them. Wang, however, stayed grounded in reality and said Zhang had tried to kill them, so there was no way he would willingly help. Yu tried to convince her, saying they hadn't actually tried to hurt him, and even if they had broken in, they wouldn't have killed him. Wang responded coldly, "If that's what you think, then you're the one who should go and get the medicine from him." Under pressure from the man with glasses, who was desperately calling out in pain, and Bei, who warned that if they died she and her friend would become easy targets for Chen, Yu finally agreed. She would try to get the medicine from Zhang. She then called him. Meanwhile, Zhou was carefully removing the arrows from the injured people, explaining again that without antibiotics, the situation would become extremely dangerous. When Zhang answered the phone, Yu started crying dramatically, blaming him for the condition of the injured men. She said his actions would lead to Bei and the others dying. Zhang responded coldly, saying they were all going to die anyway because of the coming blizzards. In his mind, he believed no one would survive the disaster, so it didn't matter whether they died from cold, hunger, or anything else. Yu interrupted his thoughts and calmly said she knew he was angry with them, but right now she needed his help to save lives. She repeated that they urgently needed antibiotics. Before she could continue, Wang snatched the phone from her, shouting at Zhang, insisting they should all stand together against Chen. She added that he would feel guilty if her friends died because of him. Zhang replied that if he cared about guilt, he wouldn't have shot them in the first place. He said he had done it because he wanted them to die slowly and painfully. He added that the body of the man in yellow was still lying in front of his house, and he was sure their hatred would only grow. Even if he helped them, they would eventually try to take revenge. Wang tried to argue that they were not people who seek revenge, but Zhang refused to trust human nature. He wouldn't give them anything. Then he asked to speak to Yu again, saying he was considering letting her enter his house alone. At that moment, Yu took the phone back from Wang and said she had been waiting to hear that. She even said she was already on her way to him. Wang tried to stop her, asking what she would do alone, but Zhang interrupted and said he only wanted her to come, no one else. Yu's expression changed in front of everyone. She calmly said she had no problem with that and would go alone. She immediately ran off, excited. Wang tried to grab her, but Yu shoved her away and said she was sick of her. They were living in chaos. At that moment, Wang completely lost her temper. She slapped Yu across the face and shouted at her, asking how she could leave after destroying everyone's lives. Fabing was in shock as well. He asked her how she could do this after telling him she loved him and hated Zhang. Yu replied coldly and shamelessly that she just wanted to be happy. She said that if she stayed with Fabing after all the resources were gone, she would end up suffering. She grabbed his hand and told him he was a good person, and that if he truly cared about her happiness, he should let her live the life she wanted. She thanked him for everything he had done for her before, but made it clear that right now he couldn't give her what Zhang could offer. While Wang was trying to comfort the injured Bei, Kai ran after Yu, screaming why she was the one who deserved a happy life. In rage, Kai tackled her and held her down, stopping her from leaving the house. Wang also joined in and said they would not allow you to leave from now on. At that moment, Dr. Zhou didn't want to get involved anymore. She decided to leave, saying that without medicine, there was a very high chance they would all die. After she left, the man with glasses suddenly said he had a new plan to deal with Zhang. He explained that he had seen pictures of Zhang's supplies, heating equipment, and large amounts of food. Because of that, they could post the images in the building's group chat and expose how much he was hoarding. Then everyone in the building, including Chen and his group, would turn against him. Once that happened, they could divide the resources together. You got furious again and said they should not try to destroy Zhang's life, because that would also destroy hers. Wang snapped back, almost hitting her, and told her to shut up. Bei defended Yu, saying he loved her and believed she would eventually change her mind. Wang insulted him, calling him naive, and said Yu was only using him and had been ready to leave him moments ago for Zhang.